Bangalore. I am welcoming all the participants and my fellow coordinators for this evening and the event. I'm happy to share with all you that the participants are from various backgrounds like students, faculties, industry people, and some government officials also. I'm welcoming Professor Mayank Srivastava to deliver the talk on the future of nanoelectronics and possible roles India can play. Let me provide quick introduction about Professor Mayank Srivastava. He is working as an associate professor in IISc Bangalore. Professor has received numerous awards and fellowship in India as well as abroad. He is an IEEE senior member and received multiple awards from IEEE. He has published more than 160 research papers and 48 patents. He has received more than 33 crores of funding for his research from various funding agencies. Without any further delay, I request Professor Mayank sir to start the session. Sir?
Thank you. Thanks to the organizers, IEEE, participants for being here. I would start this talk with a note that this talk has evolved in last 5-6 years based on various discussions I would have with many stakeholders in the country. Based on many times I have given this talk and many previous versions of this talk at different places in the country, and the number of inputs I have collected and the kind of trends I have seen around the world. So, and that's the reason, why the title of this talk is something related to the future of electronics or nanoelectronics and what India can do in this direction. So let me just put my background here. My group works on the science and technology of electron devices. So we work on both the science threads as well as various technology threads. And the focus eventually is to basically enable the kind of futuristic technologies that you keep hearing these days. And as I said that, this talk has been or is an outcome of various deliberations and discussions and contributions from different people across the country, as well as within my group, my colleagues, as well as the students and the funding agencies. And therefore, I should acknowledge them before I start the talk. So here's the outline of my talk, and I have divided this into 3 segments. One is, what you can call as near future electronics, which I call, or I would say, which is advanced CMOS, silicon CMOS. Then I would, the second bucket is basically something which may happen, let's say, in next 5 years to 10 years. And then something which can happen, let's say, beyond 10 years, or, the integration of the near future and the far future electronics. Now, why we are talking about, electronics and, the technological evolution, the development, and what has led to this evolution. So we need to understand, how technology has changed in last several decades. And what is the building block behind that, or what has basically led to this kind of technological evolution? To give you a hint, or to give you a feel for it, on left-hand side, what you see is an IBM calculator, among the very first IBM calculators, 60 years back. And you see, for doing basic calculations, for basic operations, you need, the requirement was to have a system which is of the size of possibly, a regular size bedroom, right? And on the right-hand side, what you see is among the latest laptops. And this particular laptop can possibly do several billion times, more operations and is several million times more powerful than this IBM calculator, but is possibly, close to a kilogram. So the question is, what has led to this kind of evolution in last 60 years? And the answer is the evolution has happened because of the kind of advancement that we have seen in the semiconductor technology. And that's why I'm going to talk mostly about the semiconductor technology and give you a link, that how it can enable the future electronics or future nanoelectronics, right? So if you see here, you see some of the very first vacuum triodes or vacuum devices 80 years back, and in 50 years of a span, something which was a vacuum triode or a transistor which was pretty bulky. Now in 1997, when you see a chip which is more than 1 billion transistors, is possibly a lot more smaller and lightweight. And this has happened because of the advancement in the, as I said, semiconductor technology. So in early 1900, you had vacuum tubes, and these are pretty bulky switches, pretty bulky, devices. The transistor got invented 1947. The first chip was demonstrated in 70s, and by the beginning of 21st century, we had chips with several billion transistors, and now we have chips which are more than 5 billion transistors, where each transistor is less than 10 nanometers, right? Now the conventional scaling has come to an end, and that's the reason why people started exploring many new materials. And therefore, with new materials, you have new possibilities. With new possibilities, new properties, you can think of newer or better applications, right? So if I talk about the conventional CMOS, I mean, what at least we want from these newer materials and the newer properties, we certainly want, that if they replace silicon, they offer better performance and offer the kind of applications that the silicon was able to cater to. So what we have seen in the recent time and what will continue for next, 5-10 years with silicon is the kind of advancement in the CPU that you have seen, the CPU technology. I mean, the compute technology has advanced so much. The system on chip technology had advanced so much. So for instance, the reason you are able to see these smartphones, gadgets, all the handheld and wireless devices, because, we are able to integrate everything inside a single chip. And one would like to have the same feature with future technologies, but going forward, even with the most advanced silicon CMOS, one would like to get as many as possible functionalities integrated. So when I say as many as possible functionality, a system on chip, what I mean, for instance, if you have a CPU block, in a CPU block, what you have is just a memory and logic. We are not concerned about any other operation. We only have memory where the data is saved, and we have logic or the processor where the processing happens. This is a typical von Neumann architecture. The data is fetched from memory, and the data is sent back to the memory. But if you talk about a system on chip, we are talking about basically other features as well, which means, we are talking about a lot of RF functionality. We are talking about a lot of analog and mixed signal functionalities. We are talking about several different kind of interfaces, because you are interfacing with an outside world where it could be anything. It could be a camera interface, it could be a sensor interface, it could be a fingerprint interface, anything. I mean, anything that you want to integrate in your system, you need an interface to integrate that functionality and have a communication between that particular functionality or feature with your system on chip, right? And many other functionalities along with that, which you want to integrate on the same chip, and that is what people are able to enable, right? So this is the roadmap which the industry has seen. For instance, in the very early years, like 20 years back, when, let's say, the cell phone came in the beginning, you had these very bulky cell phones, and the reason was that not everything was on the same chip. So you had only digital and little bit of analog on the same chip, but rest everything was on board. So because of that reason, you had your cell phones pretty bulky, and they were not capable of doing anything more than making a call or sending a text message. right? And gradually, you get many other functionalities like RF transceivers, power management units, radios, power amplifiers, and whatnot, integrated across the same chip, and that basically made the chips more powerful, the system on chips more powerful, and therefore the handheld devices, cell phones, a lot more powerful and a lot more handy in terms of size and weight, right? So that's the reason why we have seen this kind of advancement in some of the advanced smartphones that we see today. They are possibly capable as the laptops or the desktops, right? So this is the kind of integration I'm talking about. I mean, the pictorial representation may look a little old. Some of these gadgets are pretty old, but I hope this gives you the gist that we are talking about integrating all kind of features inside a cell phone, and going from cell phone, the smartwatch is already there, and most of these features already integrated there. And the reason they all are integrated because the kind of advancement which the silicon or the semiconductor technology has seen, right? And if you talk about the future, as I said, let's say next 5 years, we are talking about Internet of Things, where let's say many of these functionalities are able to talk to each other. Many of these applications are able to talk to each other, right? Or for instance, let's say everything being interconnected or connected with everything in a kind of a smart city, right? So you can be anywhere, you can control anything anywhere, and we've already started seeing these kind of things nowadays, right? So I was trying to set a sense for all of you that the kind of technology evolution we have seen and the kind of technology evolution or the kind of technology advancement we want to see in future. Now let's try to understand that what is required for for a system on chip kind of application. I mean, if you talk about just a CPU or just a processor application, which is purely digital in nature, you don't have to worry too much about the voltage handling capability. You don't have to worry much about the nature of the kind of features that the device has to offer. You are good to go with just the digital switching operation. You don't have to worry a lot about the metal density, right? And you also don't have to worry a lot about the leakage, because you are going to basically connect your CPU with mostly an AC power, and therefore power loss or power consumption is not a concern. But for handheld devices where you need these system on chips, you need to make your system on chips, or you need to make your technology platform a lot more advanced, because you have to integrate circuits which are going to be RF, which are going to be analog, which may require mixed signal capability, which should consume a lot lower leakage, right? Which should have very high metal densities, and possibly also requiring very high voltage handling capability for many of the applications which may require several tens of voltage, right? So then when you're trying to expand your conventional silicon CMOS to something which can enable system on chip, you have to basically go through a lot of technology expansion. You have to enable a lot of features in your technology, and that's the reason why SoC technology takes a lot more time than CPU technology, and that's the future. Going beyond, for instance, now you have FinFET technology, which is 7 nanometer and below. The future trend and the industry want that this FinFET can be extended further to SoC, and you can have these advanced SoCs based on FinFET technology, right? Now this is another thing which is important to highlight, that so what is going to drive these kind of integrations and future is, one is the scaling. So when you talk about going beyond FinFETs, one is the scaling aspect. So when you think of beyond FinFET, you can think of nanowires and tunnel FETs, and the other aspect is integration by increasing the metal density or high voltage handling capability, right? So let me put a question here. This kind of question often comes to everyone, and this audience, I believe, possibly consists many students, and the students also have this question. So if somebody asks you what kind of fab India should invest in, your answer should be an SoC fab. And the reason is that, as I said, digital technology is easy, and since digital is easy, the digital technology also changes very fast, right? So this is called high obsolescence rate. and the digital technology changes in 2-3 years, right? Something which changes very fast is difficult to establish from scratch, but something which is like SoC technology, which takes time to develop, to evolve, and therefore it also expires in a longer period. So therefore, for instance, an SoC technology would expire, let's say, in 10 years, 15 years. So SoC technology has a longer lifetime, and therefore, if somebody asks you that which kind of fab India should invest in, you can say that India should invest in a SoC kind of a technology. Okay, so coming back to the two aspects that I was trying to highlight. One is, if you want to scale these technologies further beyond FinFET. So FinFETs have shown that, they cannot be scaled in terms of transistor length. They cannot be scaled below 12 nanometers, 40 nanometers. In terms of transistor node, they cannot be scaled below 7 nanometers. So so the other applications or the other device types which people are pursuing, or people have pursued a lot, I would say, are the tunnel FETs. So tunnel FETs operate on the quantum tunneling principle, where the scaling is not defined in the same way as it happens in a conventional transistor, and therefore you can scale tunnel FETs to a lot smaller sizes. So my group has done a lot of work on tunnel FETs. And the other aspect is, if you want to scale these technologies and have them enabled for SoC applications, you also need to have high voltage devices integrated. But then, it doesn't go hand in hand, right? I mean, on one hand, we are talking about scaling it, right? We are talking about making it 7 nanometers, 5 nanometers. On the other hand, I say that you should have high voltage handling capability. So these two things don't go hand in hand. So that makes the life complicated. That how do you make transistors which can handle very high voltage, but still the transistors are done in 5 nanometer kind of technology. So that's another challenge which one has to deal with in these kind of advanced silicon CMOS. So the future is FinFET and tunnel FET SoCs, but one has to deal with these two particular applications. So do these two particular challenges going forward, right? So I'll skip some of the work which my group has done. Now the question is that if India want to take lead in future, what India should do. So one aspect is that often this question comes that what kind of fab in which India should invest in. And as I said that, you can say that it should be an SoC fab because that stays for a longer period, and therefore that's a good investment to do. The other question is that, what to do beyond silicon. I mean, the silicon may continue for few more years, maybe 10, 15 years, but what beyond silicon, right? What we can do beyond silicon, right? And so the answer is that, if you want to basically get into technologies beyond silicon, one need to basically take a risk and jump the roadmap. So one need to be a leader in future technologies before the other countries become a leader in the future technology, right? So we need to basically have disruptive approaches, invest in disruptive approaches where the learnings from silicon is not important, right? So, and now I'm going to talk about some of those technologies where the learnings from silicon is not important, right? So one of the technologies is graphene and carbon nanotube. Graphene is a one atom thick sheet of carbon atoms, where each carbon atom is arranged in a honeycomb lattice or hexagonal fashion. So this monolayer sheet is called graphene. And now if you fold this sheet, and depending on the way you fold it, you get a single wall nanotube, multi-wall carbon nanotube, and depending on the way you fold it, you get a metallic carbon nanotube or a semiconducting carbon nanotube. So you get a semiconductor as well as you get a metal out of it, depending on the way you fold it. Graphene in principle is a semi-metal, so you can use this as a metal. You can also use this as a semiconductor for transistor applications, right? Now, most of you would know that transistors performance is defined by the kind of carrier mobility the transistor can or the material can offer. And if you look into this carrier mobility, compared to silicon, this is 10 to 20 times higher, right? So, which means the graphene-based transistors must operate at 10 times higher or 20 times higher frequency than silicon. And that's the reason, for instance, if you see the theoretical cutoff frequency of graphene is close to 20 terahertz, much higher than any silicon transistor, any other bulk semiconductor can offer. Interestingly, it also has very high thermal conductivity, and very high thermal conductivity means it will not hold heat, or it will conduct heat very efficiently. If you look at the material properties from the metal or from the metallic application point of view, it basically outperforms copper. Copper is the most advanced metal technology which is used in silicon CMOS, and graphene outperforms copper in all aspects. So, you can safely say that graphene is a wonder material in all aspects, whether it is semiconducting properties, transistor properties, or the interconnect properties. So graphene caters to some of the very key and niche applications. I would not say that graphene can do everything and graphene can replace silicon completely, but let's see where graphene can do a lot. For instance, terahertz applications. Terahertz is a certain band where there are a lot of interesting applications possible, which I'll show you in the next slide. It's a band between 0.3 terahertz to 10 terahertz. But at present, there is no electronics or optoelectronics which can cater to this particular band. Now, what you can do with this band, for instance, you can use these terahertz signals for homeland security, for non-invasive imaging. For instance, you would have seen this kind of pictures where somebody is carrying a weapon under the clothes, and you can see the weapon under the clothes using the terahertz signal. Seeing through the wall is the technology which is possible using terahertz kind of radiation or terahertz photons, right? So you can do the seeing through the wall kind of imaging. You can also do spectroscopy. So without concealing the weapon, you can figure out whether the non-metallic substance is a plastic explosive or something else, right? You can also use terahertz bandwidth for high altitude communications, right? So you can think of space communication, satellite to satellite communication using terahertz kind of frequency. Now, what is missing is the technology for electronics to control and manipulate the terahertz radiation for imaging, sensing, and communication, and that is what some of us in ISC are working on. So there are a lot of programs around the world on graphene terahertz, and one such program is in ISC as well, and we have made a lot of progress there. Right? So I'll skip that part, but I want to emphasize that we made seriously big progress at the graphene technology front. And if you see the transistors that we reported, the performance is 20% higher than the best transistors reported by IBM TJ Watson lab in the past. Now, graphene, on one hand, it can do terahertz. You can think of terahertz electronics. These are very high frequency electronics, but graphene can do many other things. Graphene, as I said, is a fantastic heat conductor. And therefore, you can think of graphene as a fantastic heat spreader. One of the biggest issue in the advanced smartphones or advanced gadgets these days is heat spreading. So if you open any gadget, you will find a lot of material used for heat spreading, and a majority of weight or a significant portion of weight comes from heat spreading as well as EMI shielding. Now, if you can think of making a lightweight material or a massless material for heat spreading, graphene, is in principle almost massless. So if you can make heat spreader using graphene, you are going to save a significant amount of space, area, weight, and cost. As I said, graphene is also a fantastic material for EMI shielding, electromagnetic interference shielding. And if you open any gadget, you will find a lot of space and weight being occupied by the EMI shielding material. And if you replace that by graphene or graphene-based, composites, you are going to save a lot of weight in advanced systems. Another interesting application is transparent display. The reason you cannot have transparent display with the current technology, because the moment you put any metal electrode running through the display, you are going to see the electrodes. But graphene being transparent to light, you can think of making these electrodes with graphene, and thereby you can enable transparent displays. So as I said, graphene is already transparent to light, but then there are many other things which graphene can do. Using graphene, you can make tunable antennas. Right, you can make superinductors and supercapacitors. You can make these terahertz sources and detectors. You can also use them in a lot of sensor applications, transducers and particle detectors. So there are a range of applications which graphene can cater to. Now, another interesting thing which graphene did was, graphene led to the invention of many other materials which were also two-dimensional nature. Right? It happened because theoretically long back it was projected that no material can exist in two-dimensional thermodynamically. So thermodynamically, they would not be stable and they will collapse. But then when people had shown that graphene can exist, this gave encouragement to many people to find whether the two-dimensional variant of many other 3D materials are possible or not. And that led to discovery of many 2D materials. And today, there are more than 700 2D materials which can be exploited for many of these semiconductor applications. So what is the advantage? I mean, A, you have many of them. And since there are many, they all offer unique properties. So they can be scaled beyond silicon. They are flexible, so you can also think of making flexible electronics. They offer very high performance. They can also offer vertical integration. And if you integrate some of these materials together, you can think of designing a new material which is called a field material on demand. Now, as I said, why they are interesting? There are range of materials. There are many materials. So you have graphene, as I already spoke about. You have phosphorine, with different kind of band gaps. You have TMD, transition metal dichalconates. You have insulators, and so on, right? And as I said, that they offer a range of properties which are useful for electronic applications, for optoelectronic applications, for insulating applications, including quantum computing applications. So, I mentioned flexible electronics. So what you can do with these materials, for instance, you can think of making high performance electronics. You can also think of making flexible electronics, a flexible cell phone tomorrow possible, or for instance, a foldable television in principle, or a rollable photovoltaic or a solar panel in future, right? Or let's say a lab on tattoo. So you have a tattoo which you mount on your body, and that tattoo will do a lot of monitoring across your body and will send the signal to your cell phone, and you can monitor your your body health in your cell phone, right? Since they are extremely lightweight in nature, you can also think of making lightweight, ultra lightweight electronics for these kind of lightweight micro airborne vehicles, right? And what not? I mean, there are a range of applications. You can think of integrating all this electronics wherever you want, and you can enable all kind of future applications, right? And that's the reason why it has been projected that, let's say 10-15 years down the line, the future electronics and the wearable electronics is going to be there everywhere, right? So if I put a chart, and if you try to understand that what all it can do, there's barely anything which is not there in the chart, right? So all 2D materials can cater to almost all kind of applications, from advanced computing, high performance computing, flexible electronics, wearable electronics, brain chip, brain computations, quantum computing, sensors, photovoltaic, and so on, right? So worldwide, a lot of effort has been put in place, and that's why if you just do a Google search 2D material electronics news, you will see a lot of news, worldwide, a lot of developments being demonstrated on 2D materials, 2D material-based electronics, optoelectronics. And so we have also a program in ISC where we have done extensive work on 2D materials. And as of now, we have touched base on 6 different 2D materials, having applications in wearable electronics, flexible electronics, neuromorphic electronics, and advanced high performance electronics. Right. So as I said, worldwide there's a lot of progress happened in this, and the reason I'm saying that this will see a much faster progress compared to silicon, because let's say silicon, the material was invented many years back. The first transistor came, let's say 70 years back. The first chip came something around 50 years back. So there's a came in 2017. So the first chip, the first processor based on 2D materials was reported in 2017, just in 6 years, right? So, and now if you see, if you do a Google search, and you will find that, for instance, IMEC has a big program, and IMEC is able to do a growth at 300 millimeters. right? So there's a significant exponential growth in this area, and that's why I'm saying that in 10 years, you will see 2D material-based, electronic circuits, chips, and other applications in the mainstream. So electronics is not the only thing. 2D materials can offer applications in the optoelectronics. One of the key reason, or one of the interesting reason why this is an interesting material for optoelectronic is, one, you can extract light much more efficiently compared to a bulk material, and second is, because of the kind of tunability you can get a tunability in terms of the wavelength that you would like to have from the 2D materials, from the 2D material based optoelectronic, right? So I would stop the 2D material part here and let's move on. So, what is there after this high performance computing or high performance flexible electronics? Another interesting thread which is being pursued nowadays is brain inspired computing, right? So the fundamental question is, and on which there's a lot of progress happened around the world in last 10 years, is, can we mimic brain? Right. So, but the question which I'm putting, which is a little beyond what is being pursued nowadays, is, can we mimic a 3D flexible chip which works like a brain? Right. So the applications are many. For instance, many things which the conventional computer cannot do, a brain-inspired computer can do. Right. So for instance, artificial vision, multi-sensory functions. The computations where the speed and the power of the conventional computers restrict the computation capability, those kind of computations can be done by brain-inspired computer without costing any speed limit or any power requirement. You can process multi-dimensional noisy sensory data in real time with the brain-inspired computer, which is something which cannot be processed in real time using conventional computer. You need to spend many hours and many supercomputers to process the same kind of thing which a brain-inspired computer can process. And if you think beyond, there are many applications. For instance, if you want to process a sensor network data in real time, or you want to basically have a computer medical imaging and whatnot, you cannot do that with conventional computers, but you can do that with brain-inspired computers, right? And that too in real time. Real-time processing is the key here. Otherwise, if you just want to simulate that kind of brain activity, you can certainly put a world's biggest supercomputer, but you should keep in mind that the world's biggest supercomputer, just to simulate a cat's brain equivalent capability, is 1500 times slower than a cat brain. Forget about human brain, right? Now, there are two different approaches that you can pursue. One is the software approach, which is basically you run the network on a conventional von Neumann computer. And as I said, that just to run a brain network on a conventional von Neumann computer, you will never get a real-time performance. Just to simulate the same activity on a conventional computer, you are going to basically operate several hundred times to 1,000 times slower. The other approach, which can basically give you the real-time operation, is the hardware approach, which is basically where you have, in true sense, complete parallel processing compared to the conventional computers, right? So, as I said, this is one of the examples which is often quoted, that to simulate 1 minute of 1 second of the brain activity, it took 40 minutes and 82,944 processors, right? So this was one of the experiments done, and there are many such experiments being done to compare the processing speed of the conventional computer versus a brain-inspired architecture, right? But the challenge here we have to deal with is the complexity. The complexity, for instance, we're talking about 100 billion neurons. Each neuron you can think of as a small processor, which is connected up to 10,000 other neurons, and therefore you have 1,000 trillion synaptic connections, and each synapse you can think of as a memory element, right? So we are talking about 100 billion tiny processors and something like 1,000 trillion memory elements, right? So with this complexity in mind, the question I'm posing here, and that's basically the future, is sooner or later that can we develop a brain chip which is flexible and 3D like brain. Now let's go beyond, so on one hand I was talking about, so far I was talking about the miniaturization of the technology, and whatever we have seen so far that will get benefited, these applications will get benefited by the miniaturization of the technology or the inventions of the newer materials, right? So for instance, graphene 2D materials, or the change in the architecture and taking benefit of these newer materials. So change in the architecture, going from von Neumann architecture to the Brainspire architecture and taking advantage of these advanced materials. Now, the other spectrum of electronics is high power electronics, right? The high power electronics means, I mean, so far we're talking about processing data and signal. Now let's talk about processing power, right? So power is also processed, and what processes power is the power electronic systems, right? So power electronic systems will process power from one form to the other form, from one level to the other level, and so on. And what do you need there? What is the building block of these power electronic or power processing blocks? Is a power semiconductor device, right? So where do we need these power electronic systems? They are there everywhere in consumer electronics and whatnot. For instance, let's say I'm using a laptop. My laptop is connected to a charger. The charger is a power electronic circuit, right? You may be using a cell phone. Cell phone has inside power management unit because you have many functionalities which are operating at different voltages. So you need different conditioned voltages. There's a power electronic chip inside. You also have a power electronic circuit outside, which is the charger, right? And in this way, if you look around, every gadget that you see has a power electronic component, has a power electronic block, right? As I said, so every gadget that you look around, if you look around your cell phone chip, or you look inside the car that you have, right? The chargers that you have, right? Even the automotive or the locomotives, they all have power electronic systems and require therefore power electronic devices. Now there are two threads for these power electronic devices. One is a discrete thread. Discrete thread means, you know, transistors like this that you see here mounted on a heatsink. And the other thread is the integrated thread, which basically goes inside these kind of chips. So with this integrated technologies, you make these kind of power management ICs, and with the discrete technology, you make these kind of power management modules, right? Now, if you look around, how big is the power device market? The power device market, the power inverter market, just the power inverter market is projected to be, it's already close to more than $130 billion and is projected to grow at a 10% rate every year. Now, the power device market is around $18 billion today. And out of this $18 billion, around $2 to $3 billion is projected to be there by 2022 or 2023. And by 2025, it can be $6 billion, right? So now the question is, why do we need, advancement in power devices? I mean, I told you about the power systems, the requirement of power electronics, but why do we need advancement in power devices, right? So let's understand that what are the requirements that we have in the power device and what are the figure of merit parameters that we are looking into, right? So let's say this gray region is your standard silicon MOSFET offering or offerings by any conventional MOSFET technology, and you are willing to advance that technology. Now, if you want to advance the technology, we are talking about increasing the power density across the device, across the system. We are talking about reducing time to market. We are talking about reducing the cost. We are talking about reducing the losses. We are talking about increasing the reliability, right? And we are talking about increasing the switching frequency. Okay, so if you look around, if you see switching frequency, reliability, and up to a certain extent power density is a function of the device that you choose, right? Cost, time to market, losses are a function of the way you design the system, right? Now, I'll not go through the details of every single parameter, but if I summarize, everything boils down to, as I said, better semiconductor, better system design, reliable semiconductors, and reliability-aware system design. So semiconductor is the key. Semiconductor device is the key here, right? Now, why semiconductor device is the key? So this is the answer, that when you scale the technology, when you also scale the power device technology, you also improve the power device technology in terms of speed or the frequency. When you improve them in terms of speed or frequency, what you gain is you gain in terms of reducing the system size by reducing the size of the parasitics, size of the passives and the magnetics. When you reduce the size of passives and magnetics, if you open any power electronic system, you'll find most of the space is occupied by these passives and magnetics, right? So when you increase the frequency, you reduce the size, and that's the reason why you see that, compared to 10 years back, your power electronic chargers are much smaller and lightweight in nature, right? So that's the offer which the future technologies can offer. So silicon, for instance, cannot improve the switching frequency beyond a few kilohertz or maybe going up to a megahertz. But when we talk about gallium nitride can offer you scaling or the improvement of the switching frequency beyond what the silicon can offer. And that's the reason why gallium nitride, though on one hand, they offer very high voltage handling capability, but they also offer very high switching frequency. And that's the reason gallium nitride is projected to replace, 100 to 1200 volt silicon devices by year 2022, while offering much higher switching frequencies, right? Gallium nitride offers other advantages as well. As I said, that since one, as I said, they offer very high electron mobility, means they offer very high switching frequencies. The other is that they can also be operated at very high junction temperatures. Now, increasing the switching frequency is going to reduce the passives and magnetics. Increasing the junction temperature or allowing the junction temperature to go beyond a certain value will also reduce the requirement of the heat sink, and therefore these two together can reduce the system size and the weight, and therefore the cost, right? So if you look around, the requirements are many. As I said, any gadget that we see requires a power electronic system, and gallium nitride in this 100 to 1200 volt range can cater to many such applications, right? But the technology is yet not fully commercialized, and therefore there is a lot of scope for development and for country like India to get into that technology. A lot of gallium nitride programs around the world, and we have a similar program in IISc as well, funded by many different funding agencies, and we have made significant advancement in this area. Now, another key aspect I would like to highlight. One aspect is that you can reduce the system size, performance, improve performance, and reduce the cost. But then there's also further saving in terms of the cost from energy saving. So what you see here, when you design the same gadget with silicon-based technology versus gallium nitride-based technology, depending on which application we talk about, for everything there is a certain amount of saving. In case of, let's say, handheld devices, there's 23% saving in terms of power. There is in terms of variable frequency devices, there is just in US $14 billion kind of saving, and just from the US, let's say from the data centers, you can have around $130 million kind of saving, right? So if you add all of this together, let's say for a country like India, this is this was an FDI that we used to receive 5 years back, right? So world status on gallium nitride, a lot of startups are there, a lot of companies have got into the gallium nitride, a lot of support they received from their respective governments. And as I said, we have a program in IISc, and there we have made significant achievements over there. So what are these achievements? I mean, let's say gallium nitride had two major problems. One was getting a normally off device. Normally off means, I mean, if a conventional gallium nitride device is a normally on device, right? Is an enhancement, is a depletion mode device. But the standard transistors, you would like to have an enhancement mode kind of operation, something like this, right? So we had to convert this technology, which is fundamentally normally on to normally off, and we also had to make it reliable and usable for long term. So I'll not get into the details of the technology, but this is a performance chart, and our first report came in 2017, and then another one in 2019. But what you see here is that the report, the transistors that we reported are already high performing compared to any other best report in the literature. And what you see here is that this is the conventional technology, and what you see is this is the reliability spectrum, and this is the technology that we have reported, and we have expanded the reliability spectrum to much higher voltage and the current levels. We have also reported diodes. So any power electronic circuit is not possible without a diode. So you need a transistor as well as a diode, and we have made a gallium nitride based diode as well. Now, the last thread is nanoscale power SoC. So, as I said, the power electronics can be integrated, it can be discrete. What I was talking about so far was a discrete technology. Now, the further question is, can you also think of nanoscale power electronic systems or power SoCs? So at present, the power SoCs are done with silicon, but they have a limited, performance offering, and they can be used only when the power conversion or the power requirements are not so high and the frequencies are not so high. But let's say going beyond, just the power SoC market to give you a perspective is $56 billion by 2022, right? So, and this is how a power electronics chip will look like, or power SoC will look like. Majority of the area, around 70% of the area, is consumed by the silicon power MOSFET, and around 30% of the area is consumed by the gate driver, signal processing blocks, and so on. Now, one approach, which is possible, is that you replace the silicon power MOS by a gallium nitride power MOS on the chip, and integrate silicon DSP and silicon gate driver on the same chip, and thereby you can reduce the area by down to 40%, right? So this will give you significant cost saving. And there's a big market for this. For instance, if you open a LED bulb, you will see this kind of power electronic module, and you can replace this power electronic module by this kind of a power electronic chip, right? The other approach is, can we think of integrating, let's say, gallium nitride with the electronics made of 2D materials, with the inductors and capacitors made of graphene and carbon nanotube, with the heat sink made of graphene, with the EMI shielding made of graphene, and the interconnects made of carbon nanotube. This is, of course, just a future projection, but is certainly possible if many of these technologies individually are successful, right? So if they are successful individually, you can think of integrating all of that and can think of making an integrated power electronic module, which is much smaller in size and much higher performance compared to any conventional power electronics that you see today, right? So I would now summarize this talk, what we have seen so far. I have spoken about, the CMOS technology and how the CMOS is going to, be more like flexible and wearable in future. I have spoken about brain and synapse chips and the kind of technologies on which people are working now, and how, what kind of things people envision for future, like, a brain-inspired chip, which consists of, let's say, 100 trillion synapses, which consumes less than 2 kilowatt power, fits inside a shoebox, right? And I've spoken about power electronics, moving from silicon power electronic to gallium nitride power electronic, and then further integrated power electronics, and also terahertz and other electronic applications which don't exist today, but they are certainly possible with these kind of newer materials that I talked about, right? Now, if I talk about the world industry, let's say the major giants, they certainly see this happening in next 10, 15 years. Of course, I can add one more element here, quantum computing, which is also possible with some of these 2D materials. And industry see this happening in 10, 15 years, right? If you just compare the world market by 2030, it's close to $100 billion for all these areas. If we want to take a lead in some of these future areas, my suggestion to all of you, or my statement in the end of this talk, is that these newer materials can be a very different ball game. They can change the entire scenario. They don't have serious learnings which are dependent on the failures that one would have in a silicon technology. They are disruptive technologies. They offer disruptive products. And if you want to take a leadership, one has to jump the roadmap and thereby can take a lead. With this, thank you very much. And I give it back to the organizers.
Thank you, sir, for delivering a nice session.
Thank you.
On behalf of, sir, there are certain, I request all the participants, if they want to ask, they can put the question in their chat box. So some of the questions are there, I am taking up. One question, Mr. He's asking, the experts are telling that the Moore's law is applicable for certain capability applications, mostly low power devices. How long do you expect this law will be valid for this area?
Moore's law is already over. So there's no more scaling which happens, as the Moore's law has projected. So there's no more Moore's law anymore.
Okay. Sir, another question. Abhik asked, how wide band gap semiconductor help in power saving?
Okay, that's a good question. So you can think in this way that, okay, there are two aspects. One is that just having band gap is not sufficient. You also need to have a certain, performance. So let's say if you are getting, you have higher frequency operation, or let's say you have higher mobility, which is there in the gallium nitride high electron mobility transistors, and then they are wide band gap. So if they are wide band gap, they basically allow a higher field to sustain. When they allow a higher field to sustain, you can think of designing a transistor with a certain voltage handling capability with a much shorter distances. Right? So if they have shorter distances, they will have less time for the electron to travel from source and drain, and therefore they offer much higher frequency performance. Now, if they offer much higher frequency performance, you can think of reducing the. Can people mute the mic? I think. So you can think of if you have higher frequency performance, that helps a lot in reducing the switching power loss, right? And yeah, mostly it is the switching power loss, which is basically reduced by high frequency operation.
I hope sir has answered the question. Now, sir, should I take another question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. What are the latest advancement in batteries on the basis of power generation efficiency, and how nanoelectronics can be seen there?
Well, nanoelectronics and battery technology has, I would say, no relation, right? I mean, one need to understand that nanoelectronics is for electronics, and battery technology is very different. So let's say advancement in battery technology, I mean, you have newer materials where people are trying to basically increase the charge density. And by increasing the charge density, for instance, graphene has been used in some of the newer proposals, right? So by increasing the charge density, you improve the storage capacity, or let's say the charge per unit volume. But that's a very different thing, right? It has nothing to do with nanoelectronics.
Okay, sir. I'm taking another one. What is the main difference between the Synapse chip and Neuralink by, he's asking, Elon Musk?
Neuralink is a company. Synapse chip is a proposal where you have a chip which is based on or which is inspired by the way synapse and neurons are interconnected in human brain. So, I mean, there is no relation between these two things.
Okay. Sir, another question is, does the graphene has the potential to replace widely used transparent electrodes such as lithium tin oxide employed in
Yes, it can do.
Indium tin oxide employed in display technology such as organic LEDs?
Yes, it can do.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Then next question is, with the rate of present development in nanoelectronics, can we expect the future of Moore's law. I suppose the answer already sir have given that Moore's law is no more existence. Is it right, sir?
No, so let me answer this question. This is a little different question. So this is a good question. The question is that with these newer materials, can we revive the Moore's law? So yes, I mean the Moore's law died because you cannot scale further in the same way in silicon. Moore's law died for silicon. Moore's law fundamentally did not die. I mean Moore's law is Moore's law, right? So it fundamentally did not die. So if there is a material which can enable scaling beyond silicon, you can still have Moore's law. So you can still scale in the same fashion.
Okay, sir. Sir, should I take next one?
And one more thing that the scaling may be slower or faster. I mean that's a very different thing because we are talking about a different material technology. So at rate at which you have the development, the rate of the scaling may vary. But the scaling can still happen if you have a different material where the scalability is possible beyond silicon.
Fine. Should I take another question, sir?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. The graphene is zero band gap material. Can it be used for transistor for logical application, which is to be best simulator?
Hello.
Sir, should I repeat once again the question?
So I think you said, can graphene be used for logic transistors for logic applications?
Yeah. Which is
right.
the
so?
And he's also asking which is the best simulator to model the graphene.
Okay, let me answer the first one. Graphene cannot be used for logic applications because as it's a zero band gap material, you don't have very high on to off switching ratio, right? So you cannot switch off a graphene transistor. So therefore you can use it for analog or RF applications because if you know the analog or RF circuits, the transistor is always biased at a certain voltage, right? The gate is already biased at a certain voltage. So it's anyway in an on condition, and then you have your RF swing on top of that particular bias voltage. So it's always in an on situation. And therefore you can use it for analog or RF applications, or let's say amplifier applications or mixer applications. Oscillator applications, but you cannot use it for logic applications where you have to do a switching operation where it has to be off, and when it is off there's no current, and when it has to be on there should be a zero resistance. But what you can do is you can of course there's not much progress in that direction, but you can think of making a graphene nano ribbon, and that nano ribbon can offer you a certain band gap, and therefore you can have a certain kind of on-off operation. Now the other question is, which is the best simulator? I mean, there are many simulators. I don't want to endorse one or the other. There are many simulators. It's all about what kind of models you use for simulating graphene. In something like graphene, if you want to simulate, you have to basically do what's called density functional theory. And you have to basically do everything using first principles. So when you are using, first principles, there's no question of which simulator. Any simulator which allows you to account for first principles, allow you to do atomistic calculations, you can use that.
Thank you, sir. Multiple questions are asking on graphene, so I will come on that afterward. One question is very interesting here. TFETs are minority carrier devices. So, how feasible is for TFET to replace conventional MOSFETs?
Can you repeat the question? I think your voice was breaking.
Sir, it is regarding as TFET are the minority devices having very low on current. So how feasible it is that TFET can replace conventional MOSFET?
Well, the question is correct, but it would not be correct to say that they offer low current. One has to think of the architecture, and if you look into some of the area tunneling architectures. They are also called line tunneling architectures, where you have an overlapping T. Right, so where you have a vertical conduction first and then lateral conduction, they offer, much higher current compared to any other tunnel FET which was reported, let's say, maybe 15 years back. So I think one has to look into the latest architectures, let's say last 5-year literature, particularly area scale tunnel FETs, or the kind of work that we have done in our group. And if you look into those architectures, they have a promise to offer much higher currents much better, or currents of the same scale as silicon FinFETs, and much lower off currents compared to silicon FinFETs.
Okay, fine. Sir, there are some more charts. Should I take all charts, or should I collect all these particular charts and should I mail you so that can be answered after that?
I can take a few more questions, not a problem.
Okay, fine. I'm taking the one of the new questions. Several new material in WBG are coming, such as gallium oxide, which is cheaper than the GaN. What is the scope that you see?
It's a little early to say what is the scope of gallium oxide. I mean, gallium oxide, if you plot number of papers on gallium oxide versus year, you see an exponential growth in last 3 years. So the field has just started growing at a rapid pace. But saying that, whether it can replace GaN is a little early to say. The simple reason is, at present, doing p-type doping in gallium oxide is not something which is easily feasible. Like, if you want to make an LDMOS transistor using gallium oxide, you need both N and P type regions. Now, N-type regions are possible using, doping done during the growth. But what about the P-type? If you don't have a P-type, it's very difficult to switch off the transistor. The second is, I mean, the mobilities which the gallium oxide offer, the mobilities are not as high as gallium nitride. And therefore, even if you have very high band gap of gallium oxide, because of the mobilities, the resistance of the transistor, the on resistance of the transistor, will always be higher than the gallium nitride device for a given breakdown voltage. And that's the reason why, it's a little early to compare GaN versus gallium oxide. But yeah, I mean, it's a promising material and worth exploring further.
Okay, fine, sir. Last question I'm taking. Definitely there are multiple questions, but last, this is, I hope it is appealing one. It's based on some nanobiotechnology. I know if we are talking on nanobiotechnology, we need to arrange a special session for you, sir, from you. So, sir, one is asking, hello, sir, could you throw some light on nanobiotechnology, especially in defense sector?
Okay. Well, nanowire is already there. I mean, nanowire technology, if you see what industry is doing in 7 nanometer or 5 nanometer, particularly 5 nanometer, it's basically a nanowire technology. Okay, they call it nano ribbon technology, but it's a derivative of nanowire. I mean, nanowire would be something having, a given diameter or a radius and a symmetric feature along the radius. Nanosheet would be something which is, let's say, something which looks more like an oval fin compared to a circular fin, right? So an oval channel compared to a circular channel. I mean, that's technologically little more easier than a nanowire, and also offers a little more better performance compared to a nanowire. So in that sense, nanowire is already there. I mean, it's already there in, I would say in 6 months you will see production. Let me put it this way. Now, if it is already there, you can use it for strategic applications. You can use it for commercial applications. You can use it for anything. I mean, nanowire per se has nothing to do with just being used for defense or commercial. It can be used for anything depending on what application you are targeting.
That there are the challenges and the
Thank you, sir. There are multiple questions. So most of questions, I could attend here. Now we are coming at the end of this particular session. Sir, if don't mind, I request all the panelists if they can switch on their camera so that can be a good, beautiful kind of selfie to all of you. Mayank sir, I also request you if you can switch on the camera so that the participant can see you for this particular presentation.
Oh,
As well
sure,
as
why not?
Vimala madam, Vinod sir, Uttara madam, if you can switch on your camera also.
Sure. So, meanwhile, let me tell you that if there's, I'm sure there would be questions which are not answered. And if there are questions which are not answered, I will be happy to take those questions offline so people can certainly, write to me. And I'll be certainly happy to take those questions offline. And also, I would request you, if you have more questions which are there in the chat box, you can send those questions to me. And if people are writing to me, I will be happy to answer those questions.
Yes, sir. I just copied that particular question, and definitely I will. We will mail you also this particular question, as well as if it is possible, sir. We will ask the participant to mail you if you can share the mail ID to all. Otherwise, I just copied all the question, and on behalf of the organizers, we will mail you so that the
Sure.
participant will get their answer.
Sure. My email ID can be found on my webpage.
Yeah, fine. So, sir,
So, is my video visible?
Sir, your camera, you are not visible actually.
I'm not sure. I have turned on my video. I'm not really sure. The video did work last time.
If it is possible, sir. Otherwise,
No, I turned on my video. If you see my on your screen, you don't see my initials. If I turn off my video, you see my initials. So let me check. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any reason why. Possibly I joined as a participant and you made me
no
a
issue, sir.
panelist. That's
No
why it's not allowing me to show my video.
Okay, fine. We are coming. We are coming at the end of this particular session. On behalf of organizers, myself, Dr. Padole, Abhinav sir, Dr. Uttara, Dr. Vimala madam, all four colleges, Institute of Technology Jalandhar, J.H. Racine College of Nagpur, RV College of Engineering Bangalore, and then Ganga Sagar College of Engineering Bangalore. All four organizers, sir, we are thankful to you, sir, for sharing your valuable time. I know I'm meeting you second time in this particular last 5 years. So I know you are how much busy you are. And I should mention, if anyone is going with your biodata, you are an inspiring person for any newcomer in this particular technology world, sir. If we look your achievement and awards, so definitely you are the role model for all newcomers and new guys. How a technology person should be and how a person should be busy with their work. So this will inspire all my students. Those are today they had joined, and we should be thankful you for sparing your valuable time. Definitely your presentations are always good, sir. It is motivating and covering all the aspect, how the challenges are in CMOS technology, nanotechnology, and how India can lead in this particular area. So from my side, if anyone or other organization want to add, they are most welcome.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Professor Mayank Srivastava. Thank you. Thanks a lot for accepting the invitation and delivering a wonderful talk.
Okay, thank you, sir. We'll close the session then.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for organizing this, and thanks to all the participants for being here. I hope you all enjoyed. And if you have any question, you can certainly drop me a text, and whenever I get time, I'll be happy to reply.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I request host to switch on this particular session, off the session, so that that can be put to logical end.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.